Dear all, whoever will listen to this talk, where you are and when it will be and fits your time, today I would like to talk about geoethics, bridging geoSTEM and social sciences. If you never heard about geoSTEM, that's right, because I invented this term for this conference to have a right application. I'd like to thank some colleagues of mine because this is a collective effort what I'm presenting. What is the purpose of this talk? Is to introduce a philosophical school of thought, which calls itself geoethics, which is in the last decade emerging within earth sciences. And for those who are from the field, for me, geoSTEM is earth sciences, but I thought that geoSTEM, so geoscience, technology, engineering, and mathematics, is for many non-earth sciences a better acronym as anything else which came to my mind so far. So that's the structure of my talk, these 7 points which you can read there. And I have 2 statements which I would like in the beginning. First, I would read a definition of geoSTEM, something which is a little bit more academic, namely earth sciences is a range of applied and fundamental research fields, as well as related engineering disciplines and commercial undertakings. Together, they address the functioning of the earth, the intersection of earth and human systems, as well as the extraction and use of abiotic natural resources. Warning, this is a philosophy talk. Why doing philosophy? Because philosophy is not about truth. Philosophy is about the science to engineer your thinking. Possibly for this statement, I get beaten from several philosophers, but that's my approach to it. Geoethics, many of you possibly would go to Wikipedia and you find a text there, which I will not read to you. I underwrite some phrases, so relates to interaction of human and with our physical world in general. And I encircle some notions which are increasingly makes me puzzling. For example, I would never write recognition of humankind duties and responsibility towards the earth system because I don't understand what are humankind's duties on that level. Introduction further, geoethics all azimuth. That is taken from the internet side of the International Association for Promoting Geoethics, and it writes geoethics as follows. So I only highlighted the active verb. So geoethics provides something, reflects, encourages, deals, fosters, aims, promotes, highlights, aims again, and a lot of stuff in between. So my take-home message is geoethics means being aware of the societal context of geoSTEM. And that's in the nutshell why we talk about social sciences on one side and geosciences, geoSTEM, earth sciences on the other side. To give you some high-level introduction. First, the notion human niche. Human niche is the planetary network of twinned natural and cultural landscapes. That's the world in which we are living. That is the world which we are factually bundled together through our global supply chains, which we recently alter the niche. And what we are just these weeks witnessing with the war in the Ukraine and related sanction measures, we're just breaking up global supply chains, structure them differently, and that means we will structure our living niche in a different manner. Geoscientists, which means the experts in geoSTEM disciplines, are co-shaping the development of the human niche. I will come to that later, give it a little more substance. And geoethics in this context is about what I call here the cultural substrates, for example, values, interest, historical development, you name it, whatever describes societal context. In a graphical manner, on the left side of the screen, you see geoSTEM I see at the intersection between culture, economy, and engineering. Further part of the introduction. To get a feeling, if you Google bioethics, you find 54 million hits, geoethics 93,000, so it's more than 2 orders of magnitude difference. So we really talk about something which is niche. When you go into Google Scholar, you find this frequency of hits of papers which mention geoethics. The oldest ones are all wrong because they are in the database with wrong publication dates. And then you see a development mainly over the last decade that shows how this subject has evolved, how more papers were published using the word geoethics. If you go to other literature base and not the very wide Google Scholar, accounts are an order of magnitude lower, the tendency is the same, and the first ever published paper in Nature about geoethics is from Monk and Bruckert in 2020. Open a sideline, the red dot. There's some dedicated use of geoethics in geography with a completely different meaning as I will use it in the following. I have to clean my screen a little bit. So you find an introduction, a definition of geoethics on the website of the IAPG. I start reading its beginning. Geoethics consists of research and reflection on the values which underpin appropriate behaviors and practices wherever human activities interact with the Earth system. I like this very first phrase. There are over the time coming additions to it. If you go through the additions, you will see one starts from thinking about responsible science. What is responsible science? And is now more in a field where one is about scientific culture. For example, the very last edition, Geoethics, the tool to influence the awareness of society regarding problems related to georesources and the geo-environment. So finally, as introduction, geoethics initially was conceived by geoscientists, for geosciences, for professional purposes. 2016 was an important step of formulating it. This is the Cape Town Statement of Geoethics, formulated at the International Geological Congress in Cape Town. And there, more or less, is the time window where my own interpretation of geoethics evolves, which you find summarized in the bottom in the blue print. This is for me a combining a way of thinking which brings together to be actor-centric, virtue-focused, responsibility-focused, geoscience knowledge-based. You see the parentheses around geo because it's more than in the words in geoscience, all actor-inclusive and universal rights-based. You may have already noticed in passing that normally I put at the bottom of my slides some literature references when you would like to read more about that subject with that topic. So let's dig into the matters. First, we have to think a little bit about what are the socio-historical contexts of geostem. Because this is a typical European post-medieval intellectual development. When you go into the science, you find a very early engagement in European cultures with scientific studies of the Earth. Mining, mineralogy is one example. Then you see over the centuries emerging from science, research, engineering, economic, and applied into a complex societal venture, which in the end empowered European cultures to go for global hegemonic societal practices, to mobilize a gigantic physical, mental, and economic resources, and you can read about it. For those who know German, I would recommend Reinhard, Die Unterwerfung der Welt. For English, Mokir, A Culture of Growth, very important. And for those who like it in French, could turn to Fresso, l'apocalypse joyeuse, l'histoire des risques technologiques. Continuing, these European contextual models give the geostem disciplines a socio-historical foundations, because these European cultural models work only if you have an implicit understanding of the functioning of Earth, of the functioning of our planet. And quite often people are not aware of these, that they have this understanding. It's deep built in the professional disciplines. Nowadays, keyword Anthropocene on the left, right, we are recognizing that we are bringing the globe to a different state of functioning. There's a proposal from Earth System Science originating to add a new part to the geological time scale, which is called Anthropocene. That's in discussion since 2009 and likely will be in discussion for a couple of years longer. And if most of you think about climate change as the most striking example of global change, I invite them to look on the global nitrogen cycle, which is even a more dramatic change of the natural system which we are doing. And it does not start somewhere diffuse with a steam engine somewhere. No, it's in stance with the industrial nitrogen fixation before World War I. And from there, the ball rolls on. So putting aside whether the geological sciences finally agree on having at the end of the geological time scale a epoch called Anthropocene, this notion is out, this message is out, and effectively the earth science communities are at the center of discussion about the relation between human society and nature. And if you don't believe that, don't see this immediately, think about global anthropocenic climate change happen without geoscientists finding coals, oil, mineral, or forecasting weather for shipping the commodities around the globe, or estimating natural hazards for infrastructure, including down to the stability of the foundation of the building we are currently sitting in. And I learned from Alberto that he is in Vienna, and I'm damn sure that this building is not earthquake proofed. And so the people looking into the functioning of the globe, working in Vienna, don't build the building for earthquakes. If you would be in Athens, the situation would be different. I think this is very striking, showing that geostem is in anything which we are doing. It is deeply percolated into our ways of knowing and our ways of functioning. So, looking at the socio-historical context of geostem and being geoethical in that context means you have to have had a view on natural processes, socio-political drivers, cultural ethical features of the human niche, and in modern terms, searching for alternative of the given development test. Certainly, geoethics offers answers to that, but geoethics also has competitors. They come under the labels of Mother Earth, Gaia, the good Anthropocene, or eco-modernism, and you can go through the literature to find other philosophical concepts than geoethics. Here, the main message is when you look on the development in other STEM disciplines than geosciences, you can look on several decades, even a century back, on reflecting about the ethics of these professions. In geosciences, it is relatively recent. I don't know why, but it is relatively recent, and therefore geoethics is a relatively recent field. Turning page. The term geoethics, who, when, and where had it been used? In the geoscience communities, you find it about 20 years ago, first very timidly mentioned in some conferences. You find it in other domains. For example, there is a nice article on political science from Stoddard and Conwell, Peripheral Visions Towards the Geoethical of Citizenship, and nothing to do with geosciences, but uses against the same work. So even when you look now on the geosciences, that, okay, is there one common terminology? No, you find similar thinking, which goes with the notion geologic, geographical ethics, and there are different distinguishable school of thoughts. I'm cooperating with the IAPG. I'm a member of the Board of Experts, so my use of this term is tainted by that community. So if you talk to people about geoethics, they quite often have a very spontaneous reaction because the term can be understood. Ethics is about what you should do, and geoethics means therefore so what you should do to the globe. So it's a kind of buzzword, and one can be happy or unhappy about it, but it is out, it is used, but it is not a unique identifier. So now, against all this background, what's geoethics as a philosophy in geoscience is about? It is a way of thinking which is at the intersection between sustainability ethics, environmental ethics, and professional ethics. When you look in the documents, you can summarize geoethics is about the virtuous and responsible individual who pursues a practice that is geoscience knowledge-based, just, equitable, inclusive, participatory, and ecological oriented. And when you would like to read this up, you go to this paper from Pepoloni, Bilham, and Di Capua, Contemporary Geoethics within the Geoscience. Basically, geoethics at its origin is about responsible geostem. When we think what are the central tenets, they are the 5 or 6 which I already mentioned some slides ago. When you look how they get formulated, there is an application from 2014 called Geoethical Promise, which is more for educational purposes. You have the Cape Town Statement on Geoethics, which I already mentioned. And I have here centrally on this slide 4 papers which take a different view what geoethics means. Quite often, geoethics goes with affective and aspirational associations, which irritates some. What you find on that slide is a quote from a review. One of the open review processes where the reviews are published together with the paper, and I like to read it out. The whole thing, geoethics, that's the reviewer writing, consists of an idealist-based approach. According to such approach, the world is idealized as a sum of individual atoms deprived of any social character and of any capability of social and collective actions, but rather their possibility to act upon society is restricted only to their actions as individuals. There's obviously not even a single word about the structural determination upon individuals in the practical form of social organization where they live. So it goes longer on this review. It's very interesting to read. It was clear for me from which philosophical positions it was formulated, but it's a very valid question behind that. So what are the socio-cultural contexts of geoethics, which is promoted as it is givenly promoted? It's a genuine product of European cultural models. So it's European philosophies who shape geoethics. You find it, for example, very nicely depicted how culture and nature are put one against the other. And when you look on the foundations, how the philosophical foundations, how the analysis is done, the cultural domain, we use idealistic philosophies. In the natural domain, we use materialistic philosophies. We play with the culture-nature dichotomy. This is European to the very roots. And when you go back to the definition, you find it there. Appropriate behaviors and practice wherever human activities, one side, interact with the Earth system. This is the culture-nature dichotomy, which is typical for the European cultural models. So geoethics draws on Aristotelian and Kantian models initially, makes so far no reference, not any reference to any other philosophical foundations which outside Europe, African Ubuntu culture, Buddhist, Chinese, Indian or Islamic cultures. And it started as professional ethics. It's about professional concerns. It's good for geosciences. Geosciences, European Union, European culture's origin. And geoethics was conceived initially as a virtual ethics with a responsible and geoscience knowledgeable individual as a central tenet. That's good, but limited. Geoethics has some other features which are very interesting to explore. If you go into geoethics and you look for a certain type of normative framework, utilitarian ethics, Rawlian ethics, no reference made to these formal networks. There is, on the other side, and that finds its roots in the professional experience of the people who are formulating it, that what is in one context a sound ethical practice may, in a different socioeconomic context, environmental context, not be a sound ethical practice. So it's a certain pluralism by design, which is limited by individual accountability and the very strict claim to use a scientific knowledge base only. So geoethics is constrained by a scientific knowledge, but recognized it's context dependent, that it's context dependent in space and time. There's a strong awareness of technical, environmental, economic, cultural, and political limits existing in different socio-ecological contexts. You find that at the source given. Against that background, two developments have been possible in the last decade. First, to explore how geoethical thinking might evolve from something which serves geoprofessionals into something which may support citizens when intervening into the Earth system. And the second development, which was possible, bringing in the understanding of global anthropocenic change to take geoethics as a reflection about governance. So moving away from the individual human agent to the collective and institutional human agent. So summary, as I see it now, geoethics labels a philosophical school situated at the intersection of sustainability ethics, environmental ethics, and the little stiff term, the ethics of societal practice of citizens. And in this context, the professional ethics of geoscientists is a special application case. So geoethics is a school of thinking within geoSTEM. The design of geoethics does not limit it to a discipline-specific application, and the label geoethics may serve as a more generic semiotic sign. Geoethics emphasizes the societal use of geoscience expertise because geoSTEM disciplines are paramount for sustainable stewardship of the human niche. As a semiotic sign, geoethics refers to the widespread geoethical practices in any societal dealing within the human niche. So, and I think we cannot walk away from this responsibility to take stewardship of planet Earth. And that's why geoethics bridges geostem and social sciences. I'd like to thank you for your attention. And the publication mentioned at the bottom of the slide is the most recent application of this way of thinking and trying to combine understanding Earth, understanding nature, understanding human societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. That was very inspiring indeed. And if you don't mind, I would not close here, but I would like to follow up with, I think, more than a question, in fact. I would like to almost ask you to develop this thinking in a specific direction. What I mean by this is that this talk is very clear, as in, you know, where the idea comes from, and even looking at it from the outside, even though you yourself a practitioner of geoethics, you help us contextualize it in the context of European culture, like you say, and the duality between humans and the planet. But I would like to go a bit deeper into then what? So how do we operationalize this? And you know, I come from the social sciences myself. I'm not a geoscientist. A common friend and colleague, Marco Manca, who has served as our, and when I say our here, I mean Edgeryders, he served as our main ethics consultant in research. He likes to say that ethics is not really about the rules and the process that you follow, the processes that you design. It's more about the action that you take when things go wrong, as they sometimes do. And here, I would like to start from this. You have been using a lot of positive words for geoethics. And by positive, I mean descriptive. So I hear you saying exploration, I hear you saying awareness, and what I would like to ask you is, okay, but what about the action part? So once you are aware of the social and economic context in which the planet exists, then what do you do? What are your actionables? What are the implications of that?
This question is right, because otherwise this is geoethics is just an academic exercise when it is generalized for use by citizens. The use within professional context, the use cases range from how I treat my peers, how I handle diversity, how I interact with local user communities, for example, when I open, operate, and close a mine site. Yeah? So that is, but this is responsible science. This is maybe even corporate responsibility, and it would not qualify the word geo if it was not be only to label, okay, we don't talk about animals, we talk about this dead stuff, which is not really interesting for many. Therefore, I tried to push things forward, and the recent paper, which I published together with Eduardo Marone, uses this framework of thinking. To distill some political guidance, saying, okay, when we would like to tackle global change, what we need is a policy which gives the local human agent autonomy. So we call for societal processes which enable the directly concerned people to take action, to get involved in what they are, what their future is. So it's about, quite general, quite conventional, quote, in conventional political value. And we do this by combining geoethical thinking with the political philosophies of Jonas, Kohlberg, and Bunge. Takes it just as label what it means for them. So we come up with autonomy as keyword. We come out with trustworthiness. So how a human agent should behave in order to gain the trust and keep the trust of his peers. And we say, okay, we need a society which has a scientific culture and a culture of inclusive justice. That means starting from a geoethic thinking in the professional sphere, we said, okay, we need a society which empowers the human agents, which cares for behavior in the society that mutual trust is built, which cares about scientific culture, meaning knowledge-based, which means basically knowledge has to be reproducible. So the method, yes, I build, I test, I check the knowledge on the other side, and not I believe something because some authorities tells me. And I have a culture of inclusive justice, which means I am concerned about the others. I try to bring them on board. I have participatory political processes, and I'm aware that things have to be done in a manner which is justifiable. We had in a recent publication a paper published on climate change, where the researcher proposed, let's do the following deal between developing countries and the developed countries. The developed countries in the end have a debt in the carbon which they have pushed in the atmosphere. So since the 19th century. The developing countries have currently a very high economic debt which they asked to pay back. In order to find a political agreement, the proposal was, let's cancel both debts at a common reference date. So let's say we take 2015, when we discuss policies about mitigation and adaptation for climate change, we don't load it with the reflection, you have pushed so much the atmosphere over the last century. And the counterpart is, any debt which is older than 2015 is wiped out. So that's, one can question whether this is just, but it is, in the end, is a practical deal, a practical offer which can be made. And that would be for me, for example, expressing, first, I take everybody on board, inclusive justice, past generation, present generation, future generation, global south, global north. I build it on an understanding, scientific understanding. The stamped carbon hits the entire planet. So this is the geo knowledge base. I try it, bring it in the process which led to the Paris Agreement, which is in the end a moment of collective global trustworthiness. People trusted each other, that knowing that all the political dealings which were around it was a high moment of trust. And when we set a starting point like that, we can then far easier call on the actions of everybody. For example, the stamped Germans who try to drive high speeds over the motorway and not get down to 100 kilometers per hour, which would cut several % out of our annual carbon budget. So that is for me an example to apply geoethical thinking. And what we did in the paper which I quoted is, we looked on experiences from COVID-19, looked on the likely situation which is will come in by sea level rise, saying, okay, what can we learn from one for the other? So what are the policy advice which can be given? And we filtered the policy advice, the policy experience from COVID-19. We've filtered through a geoethical lens in order to make some comments on what likely will be happen in 100 years when we have to find new living places for 4 out of 5 Dutch and 2 out of 3 Belgians, and we have several 100,000 Northern Germans, and so on and so far. And we have to find places of living them for somewhere else. So I know there are far more drastic problems with sea level rise. Bangladesh, entire small island states are disappearing, but to bring the problem into our context. And as these things develop on a 100 years time scale, and we are certain that they will develop in this way, we could genuinely ask, what is a cultural policy? What is an economic policy? What is a social policy in Northern Germany, for example, saying, okay, we give up defending shorelines, all but some important ports, and you have your house there, fine, but don't believe that your children will be living there, because the dikes will break, and we will not take the cultural efforts which it took the last 1,000 years in order to get the dikes stabilized. And we will have similar discussion for the nice shores in the Mediterranean coast of Italy, which will be simply gone, and the beaches will not be sandy, but stony and rocky, and the water will move inland. So that's, these are, for me at least, some example how to apply geoethics. And basically, geoethics is a no magic at all package. No silver bullet. No, never thought about idea how to behave in a conscious manner. We take best political science and philosophy advice from the last century. We took best understanding of how this planet works, and we try to bring this thing together and say, people, please, people, try to be reasonable, try to be understandable, and apply common sense. And from that going forward to an actionist of people who would like to do something on a very concrete example. I have in a book which I organized during the pandemic, there is an article from Claire Nelson, who is a former engineer, UNESCO activist, about how people behave badly, trying to think about getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, putting tons of certain kind of rocks on the beach in the Caribbean, not thinking about the man. And she calls on that for a different kind of educated leadership in order to bring things forward. So that is for me about geoethics. Geoethics is a non-nonsense sense, bringing best given understanding together, on one side anchored in geoscience understanding, and one side anchored in social science understanding how our societies function. And it's not about silver bullets.
No, of course. I'm just hearing you, and still, I correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the key point here is that we who are not practitioners like you are, we tend to think of earth sciences as pure sciences. So somebody does the math and say, well, if Antarctic glaciers
yeah, I'm listening.
into the sea, then you'll have a sea level rise by so much, and then you can draw a map and see how much land you're going to lose, where you're going to lose it. End of the story. Now the economists move in and say, okay, we need to make provisions for that. What do we do, etc. But also it is true that in fact earth sciences are very applied, like you said. They in fact enabled the Anthropocene in a way. No? So it's not some earth scientists are doing the modeling, but others are building the dikes. And so there is a triage work to be done. And this, it makes a ton of sense that this triage work would be done in a holistic way. So taking into account things like population density and economic significance. You mentioned important ports that will probably still be defended when the sea levels start rising, and stuff like that. So am I in the right ballpark here? So is it the case that now we are planning large scale, some small scale too, but also some large scale interventions that do require applied geosciences, and these, they need to be filtered through the filter of human settlements and human communities and human happiness, so that difficult choices can be made? Is this where we are?
Yes. As I once in a while I like to say, when you would like to work in a company, you do a Master of Business Administration. When you would like to run a planet, as we are doing, then you need a Master in Geoscience. And I have here pulled it out of my library, a book which is, let's see whether I can get my screen large. Yeah, see what I'm showing a bit.
It's getting eaten up by your
background. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, yes, I can see.
So this is in German. So it's an interesting language, but it's a minority language. The title is "The Birth of Geoengineering," and it talks about collaborative big engineering projects of the 19th century. Panama Channel, for example. The channels in the Alps, another example. And those people who talk today about geoengineering would never say, okay, that's our beginning already. We are doing it. So what I say is these earth science applications is so deep in our daily doings, in many professions integrated, that we are not perceiving it as this. But if you would take it out, our buildings would collapse. If you would take it out, our shipping over the ocean would be
unreliable at best.
Or why did Mr. Columban went to the Canary Islands? Because he had the understanding that there were on a global scale the winds from the east to the west, and he can get his sailing boats westward, and then he had to move a little bit north, and then he came back with the westerlies. So this was deep understanding how the planet functions. You have the same for the mining engineers in the 17th century. So this is, and this is I think this is a tremendous cultural discovery for those of us who study this culture, seeing, okay, wow, that's academic. We see it on one side, but it's deeply in our practice. And those who study science have to answer the question, why is the perception that geosciences is so unpractical? Why is it only academic? Do you know who is the most courageous scientist?
The most?
The most courageous scientist.
Courageous scientist.
Is the meteorologist, which at 8 o'clock goes on the TV screen and tells tens of million people how the weather will be tomorrow. Yeah, a subject where everybody depends on, where everybody has an opinion on, and this guy tells it will rain on your barbecue. So, or it will not rain on your barbecue. Well, when it rains on your barbecue with a thunderstorm, which comes 2 hours earlier than others, you blame this guy having done the wrong forecast. Tell me any other profession who has this courage to go on the evening and tell people that will be the weather. And what is behind that? There are 200 years of observation of astrology. There are first hand-drawn maps 100 years ago. There is the emerging of using weather forecast in the Second World War. There is the first use of gigantic numerical computers to make forecasts in the 1950s. So there is, and then there is, for example, a fantastic conference in Brussels in 1863, very close to your place in Brussels, where people around the globe sat together, convened by Belgian scientists to agree on a manual, how on ships one should record weather records. Weather observed 6 o'clock in the morning, that and that. And then for decades, even centuries, this was running. And you tell me earth sciences is academic? No, it's damned practical. It's very damned practical. So, and that the difference comes before we starting make the Anthropocene. We could allow to have an image of these geologists going out on the field side and taking some rocks here, taking some rocks there. There's the oceanographers which measure a little bit of salt water here, measure a bit of salt water there. Because we were, as humanity, not as strong enough to change this globe. And that we're doing now. That we're doing now. So, and that projects earth sciences away from the ivory tower, where they never have been, as we have discussed, where they have been seen to be. And therefore, in order to be a responsible social scientist, you need a 2 years additional program, your master in earth sciences, in order to understand what you are doing.
Indeed, while you were talking, I thought that maybe the ivory tower idea is relatively recent, maybe 17th century or so, because the first science were earth sciences, no? Yeah. You had the Egyptians measuring the floods of the Nile, you had the Romans building these giant aqueducts that made a metropolis with 1 million people possible.
Exactly.
There was not enough water or food for 1 million people before they decided to build all these gigantic public works 2,000 years ago. So, draining swamps, another example, you name it. Terracing cultures for rice in places like Thailand or Indonesia or,
And that's why at the beginning of my talk, I give this small academic description what geosciences are. I can try to bring it up again, but I think I lost it somewhere here now. So that's so when from a perspective of history of science, it is a very interesting question why one could believe that this is something academic stuff, for some wired people who go out in the field. Possibly it was this idea came up because it was already so deep in the practical life of the engineers, of the architects, of whatever you call it, that these chaps could go off and collect some rocks, that these chaps could go off and take some water samples. So because society had already internalized this know-how, applied it daily. And as I said during the talk, think about what would our world, if you're not some geologist to find some coal, some oil, some gas, some uranium. Think about the meteorologist. I think about global transport. If I were not meteorologists doing waves and storm forecast, your ships would never be there where you were expecting them. And those engineers who look in the foundations of the building where you are in and say, okay, dear guys, let's do it a meter deeper. This is this soft Belgium yellowish thick layer of sand, and we have to dig a little bit deeper and put some stronger foundations in. Then it stands. It stands in Brussels. It does not stand in Mexico City, where the same ground is. Because in Mexico City, it's an earthquake region, and if the soil which you have in this kind, which you have in Brussels, is amplifying the movements. So you have to make your building even stronger in order that they stand. But these disciplines, the building engineers would not claim they do earth science. No, maybe they don't do science, but they apply earth science. This is very deeply in our way of doing. And this combined with what is the European development of the last 500 years, where in the end European powers conquered world, bringing with this a way of thinking, a way of functioning, geosciences as part of the package. And I'm Portuguese. We made it around the tip of South Africa, turning Cape Horn and going into the Indian Ocean. So let's call it a day. Let's call it a talk.
Absolutely. I have one more question.
Yeah, please.
We don't have time. And my question is picking up on your, at some point you mentioned participation. You said part of being geoethical, doing geoethics, is look for participatory solutions. And I would like to expand a bit more on that, because yeah, I mean, not all of us have knowledge of the geosciences. We don't have a master on geoSTEM. So, but we still need to run a planet, unless we embrace a sort of technocratic approach, which doesn't seem to be what you want to do, you and your colleagues, I mean. And so, can you again elaborate a bit more about on this ability of applied, and maybe not just applied, but anyway, geoSTEM to enable people to actively participate in stewardship? Maybe give me an example again, give us, posterity.
There is a colleague who was deceased last summer, a geologist from Alberta, running the Canadian province. I've run the geological service there for many years, then in retirement took a PhD in economics. And his last work is about analyzing mining sites in South America, where a mining site are successfully developed from the company perspective and also from the perspective of the local people. And in this field, the terminus technicus is social license to operate. Social license to operate. It's a terminus technicus emerging in the mining industry, which I find has a far wider application, which means bringing around the people table all concerned people and agreeing in consensus building, yes, we will do this mining site. Yes, we know there are environmental problems to it. These are the measures which we agree to protect us against the environmental risk. These are the social benefits which we would like to have, for example, in terms of work. These are the things which you company will do when you close the mining site in 20 years. So that's an entire process. It is far away from perfect. When you look into the literature, you find a huge amount of literature around it. And he shows in his book that there are successful examples to operate that process. And some advices is what to do and what not to do at this particular example, building mining sites. So yeah, that's as far as I can give an answer to this. And for the rest, I have to. I do not like to apologize, but that is the front line of working. You see, we started with the geoethical concept as something which was for professionals, for professionals, catching up a development which in other domains was done decades before. We moved from that into saying, okay, we can have a societal application for it. And we are just now on the forefront to elaborate what could that means in practical terms. In last year was a conference in Porto about geoethics and geohydrology. 300 contributions from different people around the globe, looking in a wide diversity of subjects, including how these, for example, an example from Mozambique, where exploration site had been protected by military. Do I cooperate with the military in this situation? Where don't cooperate with the military in this situation? What do I do if I have trade-offs of different user interests? There was a lot of 95% of the contribution to this conference was about responsible geohydrology. Only a very small part of contribution looked further beyond. For example, there was a lawyer looking into how existing international agreements could be used in order to formalize certain rules. So that is the forefront. So Alberto, I leave you with the SWAF, getting an answer to your question, how to get operational. Basically, I repeat myself, the basic message is you damned guys from the other disciplines, take your second degree, a master in earth sciences, in order that you can apply your competence in economy, apply your competence in other social domains, understanding better how this planet works, how physical and chemical natural systems work. Huh?
You know, there might be an opportunity, and we can discuss this at some other time, but we are planning a proposal on environmental inequalities, and specifically on two types, which are related to energy and they are related to mobility. And the two appear to interact in the sense that in many cities, and a colleague has talked passionately about the case of Norway right now. In many cities, you've got the combo of obligation to go for passive heating in buildings, retrofit even,
yeah,
which makes city center accommodation very expensive. And then from a separate direction, you have another policy which says pollution charge. So vehicles are prohibited from entering the city unless they are electric. So that means that in some of these cities, if you're not fairly affluent, you cannot live there because you can't afford, and you can also not go there because also you can't afford the Tesla. And so that produces, in the data, it shows up in a pattern of geographic discrimination. Mm. And then maybe you can plug geosciences so that you can plan your policies in a way that they will meet your goals, but being mindful of the distributional effects and also non-distributional environmental justice aspects. For example, representational, in which certain voices are ignored, and this is thought to create trust issues at a societal level and erosion of trust and whatever. So I don't yet see an operationalization of this, but this is probably because I don't have that mastery in my second master in earth sciences. But it would be really interesting to look into that. So yeah, just I think I'm seeing signs that you're kind of getting impatient and you need to close the call, but remember, make a note of this, and we can have a separate discussion about this.
Yes, Alberto, I show certain signs simply because of my next meeting at a different place starting in 37 minutes. I have to pick up my car at another place, and I have to check operations at the place that they went today to, and have time to talk to people. So no, this is getting tough now. Yeah. Therefore, if we could refer this discussion, which I'm willing to take up. I think I don't have the answers to yet, because we are just at the forefront, some people moving into that direction. And the one paper which I mentioned is really the most advanced for the time which we could do. And you will, when you read it, you still will find it very abstract. Yeah? But that's also me and my way of functioning, working, because I believe deeply in the statement, nothing is more practical than a good theory.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is check for Lancelot Biggs, and the next time I tell you a joke about Lancelot Biggs. No, take it away. This is a science fiction figure from the 1950s.
Lancelot Biggs.
Okay. And he claimed, okay, I tell the joke, he claims nothing is more practical than a good theory. The story goes as follows. Spaceship, male crew. That's the first scene. Second scene, cook dies. Guys pull sticks, who has to do the cooking. Lancelot has to do the cooking. Next scene, desperate male thinking about the bed, food which you have to eat for the next 3 months. Yeah. Next scene, fantastic food on the table. People turn to Lancelot Biggs and Lancelot, how did you manage it? Oh yes, you see, cooking is just basic chemistry and physics, and nothing is more practical than a good theory.
Okay. No.
Which, by the way, is correct when you think about cooking. It's basics, physics, and chemistry. To a large degree, there's literature about it. Why certain cooking steps are done in a certain order, and why they only work in that way. And that's chemistry, there's physics. And that's the same why you should do your master in earth sciences. Yeah?
There's this crazy former head of Microsoft Labs who made a lab in his house and produced this insane cookbook that follows the same principle. I mean, it's like $500 or something. It's completely mad, but like the perfect way to cook this, the perfect way to cook that. Yeah. And he just had chemists and whatnot producing the book.
Okay, I run now. Sorry,
Bye-bye.
I will see you again.
Martin,
Bye-bye.
thank you for this. I will be watching the recording.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Martin.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.